What I adore about Passover is that it is the holiday where 99% of us commit to participation in some form or another. We feel as though Elijah's at the door, and we feel the presence of the angel of death. We're putting ourselves in the seats of our ancestors as they are leaving Egypt. That's what we're supposed to do. It's an occasion that you get every single year for thousands of years. And I feel like that in of itself is its own miracle. So a Seder plate is part of our Jewish material culture. It can be homemade. It could be bought from a beautiful artist. It could be something that we construct on the fly. But it is a textbook in the form of a plate.
There are 6 ceremonial foods that traditionally go on the Seder plate, each relating to the journey, the exodus from slavery to freedom. The egg, Beitzah, represents the sacrifice offering at the temple in Jerusalem during key holidays. The shape alludes to the cycle of life, renewal, a new world. The shank bone, Zura'ah, represents the lamb sacrifice during ancient Passover celebrations. Maror, a bitter herb, is to remind us of the bitterness of slavery in Egypt. Charoset is often a paste made of fruit, nuts, and wine, and is supposed to resemble the bricks and mortar Jewish slaves were forced to make during the bondage of Egypt. Karpas is a vegetable representing spring and regrowth, often parsley. And then finally, chazeret, another bitter herb, often horseradish, reminds us of the tears shed by the Israelites in slavery. On the Passover table, it's also a tradition to have wine, 4 cups of wine specifically, that we drink at key moments throughout the Seder. There's typically a 5th cup, Elijah's cup, which can be a goblet or a kiddush cup or even a plastic cup. It's filled with wine, though left undrunk, as an offering to the prophet Elijah, who we invite to the Seder to bring peace and redemption. Then there's the matzah, unleavened bread, because in claiming their freedom, the Israelites didn't have time to wait for their bread to rise. The matzot, 3 specifically, can sit on a plate or in a cloth container and are used throughout the Seder.
Now, it's going to change from people to people, place to place. If you are from Eastern Europe, Ukraine, Russia, you may still have the custom of putting a potato on the plate for the spring vegetable. Because at that time of year, what else was growing in that part of the world? Some people will have the shank bone of the lamb. Other people are vegan or vegetarian, so they'll put a roasted beet. Haroset will change from place to place. For some people, that's dates and nuts. For some people, it's apples, cinnamon, red wine. For other people, it's a bunch of tropical fruits in a compote mixed together. But the fact of the matter is, there's a lot of room for personal, familial, and cultural identity.
This includes more modern and contemporary additions too, like Miriam's Cup, which was initiated by groups of women in the 1980s to commemorate the role that Moses' sister Miriam played in the Passover story as an effort to be more inclusive of women's narratives. It's filled with water as a reference to Miriam's well, which sustained the Israelites in the desert after they escaped from bondage.
For some people, it's the olive that represents the hope for peace between Israelis and Israeli Arabs and Palestinians.
For others, it's an orange, a tradition initiated by the scholar Susanna Heschel.
A rabbi suggested that lesbian folk were not kosher. You can't bring that part of yourself to this. This is not your space.
A group of students responded by putting a not kosher for Passover crust of bread on their Seder plate as a symbol of inclusion for LGBTQ communities. Heschel replaced it with an orange.
The orange is bright and beautiful and important, and it's not against our laws of Pesach. It's not chametz, and it should be welcome and present and obvious, and a symbol of inclusion. I think that some people have the misunderstanding that you can only do things one way, but of course not understanding that whatever they've inherited has already been changed dozens of times, hundreds of times over thousands of years. What makes things ultimately super kosher, super hechshered, is the fact that we're investing our time, our spirit, our energy, our purpose into creating new meanings, into giving these very ancient forms new life.
The earliest sources for a Seder plate appear in the Mishnah, a compilation of rabbinic laws and practices written between the 1st and 3rd centuries. But we don't know exactly what form it took. One of the earliest forms can be seen in Haggadot from medieval Spain, where the plate is pictured as a basket. Distinct types of Seder plates evolved throughout the world, with different Jewish communities using a range of materials, and an array of regional and personal motifs too. For example, by the 18th century, we see Jews in Germany commissioning Seder plates made of pewter with engraved illustrations depicting family members in their homes. Today, we see a vast range, from traditional to contemporary to super contemporary to homemade. This tiered Seder plate was made between the 18th and 19th centuries in eastern Galicia or western Ukraine. And while many Seder plates only contain the sections for the ceremonial foods, this plate also includes Elijah's cup and shelves for the Matzah, so it's an all-in-one item for Passover. All around this crown structure, we see rampant lions, which are present throughout Jewish material culture, especially in synagogues flanking the Ten Commandments on top of the Torah Ark. We see lions in many different cultures as symbols of guardianship and protection. Here, the lions flank the blessings over the ceremonial foods. Their mouths are open, as if biting into the blessings, which is meaningful from a ritual perspective because the whole idea of the Seder is participation in this experience of the Exodus. This piece came to the Jewish Museum from the Jewish community of Danzig in Poland, where, in the spring of 1939, community leaders realized that life in Danzig was becoming increasingly restricted by the Nazis. They undertook a heartbreaking project. The leaders gathered together all the ceremonial objects of the Great Synagogue, which included the collection of a prominent art collector who'd owned the tiered Seder plate, and they sold the works to fund the emigration of those who could still leave. Just as the German army moved into Danzig in 1939, 10 crates were delivered to the Jewish Theological Seminary in New York, then home to the Jewish Museum. The understanding was that if the Jewish community returned to Danzig in 15 years, the objects would be returned. If not, they would stay in New York as educational resources, which they have. The life of this plate is one we see with so much Jewish ceremonial art. These pieces are not only precious works of art, but survivors with important stories to tell.
For me, Pesach is an opportunity to really express my identity. Part of the reason why I love it is because it is a holiday that it talks about liberation from slavery. And I understand that. I feel that on multiple levels. And I understand what Chazal, what the rabbis try to teach us when they say you should personally see yourself as if you were leaving Mitzrayim and pass it on l'dor v'dor, generation to generation, to your children. And then there's another part of it too, where I have to explain to people that when Passover fell at the end of the Civil War, the day that the surrender occurred, where most African American Southerners who were enslaved actually got their freedom, was also the eve of Pesach that year. So I even have a story about one of my great-great-grandfathers who was a teenager who was actually present at the surrender at Appomattox. And of course, for them, this event was told in terms of the Hebrew Bible. You know, they were expecting the day of Jubilee, they were expecting the day of emancipation. They saw themselves as if they were the Israelites leaving bondage in Egypt. So that for me, in my own family memory and cultural memory, is the idea that, you know, it's more than just symbolic. Like, if it was not for, you know, a strong arm and the outstretched hand of God and the will of the people, I might not be free. And that's what we're constantly reminded during the Haggadah. you might not be free if things hadn't worked out. And so I really feel that, because that wasn't very long ago in American history. And it certainly has its consequences to this day. One of the things that I love to do is every year I try to have, as much as possible, an African-American Seder plate. Because I figured, okay, we can also tell the story of African-American folks, and those of us who are Jews of African descent or African-American heritage, we could use this as our own symbolic place. See, there's no rule against having more than one Seder plate on a table. The beitzah stays the same, the egg. And the reason why is because in Ghana and Nigeria and other places in West Africa, but as well as in the language of Hazal, the rabbis, the egg is a symbol of sacrifice. Karpas, I took off from the practice of having the potato, using a sweet potato. The haroset that I can make for this involves molasses and pecans. And for me, the symbolism there is molasses was a byproduct of sugar. Sugar was the main engine by which the transatlantic slave trade was driven, but also molasses was part of this one of the staple foods of the enslaved. The pecans are there because when we came to this land and other lands and we were in exile, we foraged. We were forced to make something out of the pain we had, being separated from our families, our loved ones, and our original cultures. For maror, I have collard green, which also gave us life. And then for Hazeris, red pepper. And red pepper is interesting because, Africa is one of the staple flavors of the West African palate. But there's also a phrase in Wolof, which is one of the major languages of West Africa, especially in Gambia, Senegal, and Mauritania. And they were saying that the truth is a hot pepper. And it's our duty to not only tell the story of our ancestors leaving enslavement, but to live and experience the truth. Seder night. And the chicken bone is the roa. And the reason why, because the Great Migration was African Americans leaving the Jim Crow South for the Northeast, the Midwest, and the West Coast for a better life. Back then, those journeys up north took 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 hours. And you couldn't eat with the white folks. So that was your last valid, authentic taste of home before you became a Chicagoan, before you became a citizen of Oakland, before you became a New Yorker. And this was your own personal exodus. And typically I will have an orange there because I'm a gay man. And there is a legacy, unfortunately, in our tradition and many traditions, of leaving LGBTQ people out. And I've also come to put olive oil for peace between Israelis and Israeli Arabs and Palestinians. The Exodus, Letziat Mitzrayim, is a constant event in Jewish prayer and Jewish thought. You're never allowed to forget that enslavement and the possibility of never leaving that condition is central to the identity of the mishpacha known as the Jewish people. It's not about centering on a culture of victimhood. It's about centering on a culture of redemption. It's about centering on a culture of activism. And it's about centering on a culture of justice. Sedek, tidaf nafshi. Justice and righteousness shalt thou pursue. It's nothing to do with how many times you got beaten down. It's about how many times we got up and survived. Hence our own Jewish phrase, right? They tried to kill us. We won. Let's eat. Thank God. And that bleeds into my work because ultimately I feel like the work that I've done with African American foodways and talking about what we went through in terms of the Middle Passage and the food coming from Africa to America, from slavery to freedom, is really based on that Haggadah model of really sort of going through the journey to better the future and looking at your past. I will say this, I don't want to upset anybody or make anybody guffaw, but there's a whole idea that Christians have of keep the Christmas spirit the year round. Every day should be like Christmas in your heart. I think for us, the equivalent is, every day should be like Pesach. The joy of being free, but also the acknowledgement that every day we exist, somebody in the world isn't free, and we need to be the ones to help them become free.